Rhodes's previous library experience includes working as an elementary school librarian and a young adult services librarian in the public school system. Secondly, we have Avery Caldwell, who is a design educator and professional specializing in experimental design, architectural visualization, wayfinding, and interactive media. He received his BFA in studio art and his MA in architecture from UCLA. He completed his undergraduate study at the Southern California Institute of Architecture and his doctoral studies at the Claremont Graduate University. And as for me, I am an assistant professor in the Department of English and Comparative Literature, and I teach courses on the history of African American children's literature, as well as representations of girlhood and middle grade and young adult novels. So thank you all for being with us this afternoon of our inaugural One Story, Three Scholars. So I would like to start off our time with a reading of Indigo Dreaming, as well as being able to hear from the author herself. And then we will launch into how our scholars see Indigo Dreaming through the lens of their research. And then so we'll start with Gloria, move to Avery, and then I will close. And then we'll also have time at the very end to hear from our wonderful audience and be able to indulge in some of the questions and comments that you have. So again, feel free to write those comments throughout, and then we'll make sure to get them answered at the very end. So please, Dinah, start us off.
Good afternoon, everyone. I just want to express my thanks to Lashon Daley and to the Center for the Study of Children's Literature for envisioning and hosting this event. And I thank Gloria Rhodes and Avery Caldwell as well for participating. So I just want to say that I'm flattered that we're here to have a conversation inspired by my forthcoming book, Indigo Dreaming, which was created in collaboration with Brazilian artist Ana Cunha. Her being the illustrator is perfect because her art is so beautiful and because she's from an important place in the African diaspora. And the diaspora is at the heart of the project. When I look at my body of work, it's clear to me that I've always been fascinated with the diaspora and with the idea of place, maybe because I grew up in a constantly moving military family. My first published book is All Around Town, the photographs of Richard Samuel Roberts. In this book, my words accompany his exquisite images taken in my adopted hometown of Columbia, South Carolina during the early 20th century. My most recent book, H is for Harlem, celebrates that iconic place. And what I want to say about it is that the final page reads, H is for history, H is for a heart still beating strong, H is for Harlem forever, whether you visit or call it home. So history, heart, and home are really, really important. It occurs to me too that my book, Sitting Pretty, A Celebration of Black Dolls, also celebrates the diaspora as intimately connected home places in multiple poems. And I'm just going to share a few of those poems. This is Mariama, the African mermaid. The mermaid makes her home in places far and wide, from one shore of the ocean all the way to the other side. Sometimes her home is Cameroon, sometimes it's Charleston or St. Croix. She's right at home wherever she finds an African girl or boy. Listen for the sound of the conch shell wherever you may roam, and you'll know the African mermaid wants you to feel at home. Here's Vashti and Gina. And if you look closely, you can see a small doll at the bottom. Looking at you is like looking in the mirror. I may be tall, but you could be a small reflection of me. We are not exactly the same, but we are too much the same not to be from the very same family. I do not know you, but looking down at you, I see part of me as if looking into a mirror. And one last one, this is Shotwan. In my heart, you're not a stranger to me, so I call you my sister across the sea. Though I can't speak your language and you can't speak mine, the words we want will come in time. And for right now, our hearts will speak, mine to you and yours to me, through laughter, through kindness, through touch. Having heard these poems, My writing, Indigo Dreaming, should make perfect sense to you. I'll give you a bit of background where the idea came from and how it evolved. The original manuscript was written many years ago. It was inspired by a 1988 journey of a Gullah Geechee delegation from the Georgia and South Carolina Sea Islands to the nation of Sierra Leone on the coast of West Africa. The trip was followed by a 1989 visit of President Joseph Momo with a delegation from Sierra Leone. As you'll read in my author's note to this book, these journeys are documented in a film entitled Family Across the Sea. So my original manuscript for this book was a retelling of those events. So this story appealed to me for many reasons. I love the fact that Charleston, South Carolina is my birthplace. It's not the Sea Islands, but it's close enough. So I proudly consider myself a daughter of the African diaspora. And I visited several countries in Africa, but I haven't been to South America yet. So I was thrilled when my editor, Luana Hori, brought on Anna Kunha as the illustrator. The version of Indigo Dreaming that Anna has illustrated so exquisitely is a far cry from the original version, which was turned down by at least one editor, maybe more, before Luana saw the potential in it. So if anyone is interested, we can talk later about some of the big revisions that were made, as well as any other questions you have. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and share Indigo Dreaming, which is the story of one little girl dreaming of another little girl in some other part of the diaspora. What I'm sharing is the last pass of the dummy before final publication. So enjoy. Okay, so what you're seeing now are the end papers. Indigo Dreaming. Every morning at day clean, when the sun is just about to rise, I pretend that Indigo Beach is mine. And every morning at day clean, I wonder if somewhere there's a girl like me who spends every day beside the sea. Does she squirm while her mama braids her hair? Does she pick out an indigo dress to wear? Does she run like I do, slicing the air like a bird's wings on the wind, leaving the shapes of her feet in the sand? I wonder if somewhere in the world there's another busy girl searching for sweetgrass to make a basket. Or is she combing the beach for pretty shells? Does she know that if she holds them up to her ear, she will hear the ocean sing its song in Barbados, Brazil, or Sierra Leone? Is there a girl across the sea who imagines me? I stand still just long enough to get a treat from my pocket, and I wonder if there's a girl on the other side of the world eating scrumptious boiled peanuts too. Does she call them goobers like I do? Does she lick the juice running down her chin? I wonder if there's a girl like me across an ocean or a sea, playing on a beach like Indigo Beach, in the waves with dolphin and fish, splash into the water and make a wish. I close my eyes and imagine a girl in some other faraway part of the world who plays in a circle with her friends. Now she's out and now she's in, then crack, the thunder is loud like a hand clap game. I stick out my tongue for a taste of rain. Is that girl doing the very same thing? Maybe she's running as fast as I am, her footprints disappearing in the shimmering sand, darting from palm tree to swooshing palm, zigzagging like a crab all the way back home. We're having frogmore stew tonight. Would that girl far away like to have a bite? I wonder if that girl across the sea likes coconut water or sweet iced tea. Does her grandma, like mine, sit close beside her, telling bedtime stories about Anansi the spider? Is that girl counting every star? In the indigo sky, they don't seem so far away. Karimba music is in the air. Can that girl hear it over there? Is she falling asleep to its quiet beat? I think we're looking at the very same moon as its glowing fills both our rooms. In my heart, I'm sure there's another girl like me across an ocean or a sea, spending the night in an indigo dream of the two of us playing in the same sun, in the same sand, hand in hand, every morning at day clean. Thank you.
That was wonderful, Dinah. So we will have Gloria.
I'm going to talk to you, next slide, please, about oral histories. And I'd like to read, this is the only thing I'm going to read, because it was a quote that really stuck with me. And it really defines what an oral history is and how scholars use oral histories to tell stories. Oral histories are born to fly, to shine, to shout, to provoke. We do not go to all this trouble to hide history in the dark security of an archive. We expect that succeeding generations will consult our oral histories to understand the culture, politics, economics, relationships, art, religion, and societal and society of our time. And we accept the fact that they will revise our interpretations to fit their own moments of time. And Indigo, this story really spoke to me as far as oral histories, because it's she's telling her story, but she's saying, would others be doing this? And one thing I noted when I was conducting oral histories is the similarities in the stories. The places were different, the people were different, but there was always a theme that others were talking about that happened to them, especially here in San Diego, because I'm talking about documenting African-American history in San Diego. Next slide, please. So a couple of, one was, does her grandma, like mine, sit close beside her telling bedtime stories about Anansi the spider? And the other one was, does she squirm while her mama braids her hair? Does she pick out an indigo dress to wear? And people are telling you their stories, they're sharing their experiences, they're sharing their lived experiences from their homes and from their the things they've worked with. Next slide. And again, oral history just is the product of the interview. It's the narrative, it's the account of the events, but it's also, you could also have the personal narrative or the life story. Depending on the disciplines, oral history has been called narrative history, narrative writings. Next slide. And it is both the act of recording, and once the recording is established, the oral history itself. And again, these are some of the names that you would hear. Next slide. So when I started the project, one of the things that I looked at was, what are the goals of the project and what do you want to accomplish with this project? Why is this work important to the community? How does the project align with your institutional goals? When I started documenting the African-American presence in San Diego, I met with community members to establish guidelines and to also identify African-Americans in the community who have made positive contributions and continue to make positive contributions through leadership, community activism, and their lived experiences. And so it was a couple of ones that I pulled out, and as Dinah has written her story, you can pull from these stories and you can write about the experiences of an oral, one of the subjects that participated in this program. And one of the things that stuck out with me about, this is Dr. L.W. Smith, who was an educator, community activist, and sadly, we lost her last year. Her story was so personal and because it was her story, but it also aligned with a lot of things that my family told me. I'm from North Carolina, and the segregated schools they attended and the things that they missed by going to segregated schools. And she was saying she had teachers who really cared about her, and they made sure that she was provided the best education that she could, that they had. Next slide. And the other one that really spoke to me is this, and Mr. Williams is still living. He just celebrated his 100th birthday, and he's a lifelong member of the community. And he has a whole lot of firsts. He was the first city council person, the first on the board of supervisors. And when I started out with this oral history, I was dealing with people who had been the first in their fields in this area, but it kind of went in other directions with people who have contributed to different venues within the community of San Diego and Norton County. So I just wanted to kind of give you an idea of the scholarly aspect from an oral history. And these people, they agreed to share their story to provide scholars an opportunity to learn unique perspectives on history. And I just have, you have access to this. I included some books and articles that deal with oral histories, and also to align with Dinah's book about the Gullah and Geechee of South Carolina. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon to our guest. And I'd like to also thank Dr. Johnson for writing such a wonderful and inspirational book. It has inspired my young daughters as well. And they're asking questions if they have their counterparts across the Atlantic Ocean. So thank you again for that. I'm going to share my screen here and talk about, again, going back to the book and how in terms of my research here at San Diego State. And for me, it was, this idea that words, language, and storytelling are at the center of who we are as individuals and community. And, it's by design that Black communities have been disrupted from their words, from their language and their stories. And, but today, along with the other scholars here, my colleagues, I'm happy to be part of this movement that is beginning to share these narrative histories that originated from our ancestral lands. And once again, we're becoming tethered to our ancestors. And so by that, my research looks at the idea of semiotics in Black and brown communities, sorry, and how we can reshape those communities by using ancestral language and symbols. I'm very sorry. So I'm using semiotics, and semiotics is the study of symbols and signs, and I'm using this as a way to really understand the messages that are that young Black children are receiving in their communities. Some of these messages are brought out from the outside of the communities, and some of them are from within. So I'm looking at the intersection between the built environment, the architectural spaces, and the visual environment that's laid on top of that. What do those messages mean? How are they decoded? How do we then sort of reshape those communities to have positive messages, positive stories, using words and language that are positive, and also words and languages and alphabet, might I say, that reach back to our ancestors. And so for that, again, I'm looking at symbols and the study of semiotics as that. So the feeling of hopelessness is one that is common in communities of concern, when upward mobility moves at a snail's pace or is non-existent completely. It begins to blanket the Black communities as a pervasive form of Gestalt thinking. So how do young children walk to school and break away from that? How do families find ways to move beyond the visual and structural disturbances in urban life? What are the solutions? And so I'm using, again, one semiotics as a way to understand it, to move beyond the messages and the symbols. And so I do a number of case studies where I'm looking at what are these messages, visual messages that are that contain images as well as words and language, right? And many of them do not empower Black communities, right? So it's very common that we see gang graffiti. It's very common that we see messages that are leaning towards alcoholism and things like that. Again, that don't necessarily help our communities. So we see young children see these messages as they go to school each morning. They see the same type of words and images and symbols. And so these are some of the case studies that I do. And of course, there are, not all communities are like that. There are some more affluent communities, and you can see that the messages here are uplifting and positive. And so we want these type of messages in communities of concern as well. More case studies, and this is a common thing that's spread out not only in California. This is in Compton. I have case studies from several cities in Los Angeles as well as San Diego. But these are very common instances in urban and Black communities. Okay. And so what I intend to do with my research is to insert the application of African adinkras. And these are originated from Ghana, from the Asante people in the early 1800s. And they were a way of telling stories, and they're also alphabets as well. And so what you're looking at is one of the most popular ones of the Sankofa. The word and the symbol actually means to go back on the past and to bring forward that which is useful. So you see a bird here reaching back upon itself, grabbing an egg from its back, from its present. And so we understand as something to mean learn from the past, right? And so these symbols, again, were conceived as from the African craftsmen in African traditions. So my goal is to, with my research, is to use these symbols as a way of teaching, as a way of changing the narratives, changing those stories that we see in Black and urban communities. Eventually, I hope that this will be a call to action to policymakers where we can change some of the things that we do see that are not necessarily benefiting those communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Avery. Oh, I'm so looking forward to being able to talk more, engaging with the various objects and ways in which we see oral history, and also thinking about the difference between urban landscape and then the landscape that Dinah showed us, where there's so much water and nature, and how that really kind of inspired her to dream in a particular kind of way that concrete and liquor signs may not give Black children to do. I'm going to start my presentation now and kind of give us an understanding of what I do in terms of my research in conjunction with this beautiful work that Dinah has provided for us. For those of you who know, my work spans around Black girlhood, particularly in children's literature and young adult novels. So what I wanted to do was to provide a little bit more insight into how I process my work when it comes to Black girlhood, specifically through the lens of this text. So when I first read Indigo Dreaming, I was immediately drawn to how it centers Black girlhood and how it memorializes the moments of sisterhood that have become staples in African American culture. Could this image be that of Celie and Nettie from Alice Walker's The Color Purple as sisters reunite? Or perhaps this image could be of Nell and Sula from Toni Morrison's Sula, when Sula returns to town after being gone for nearly a decade. Or even more recently, could this symbolize the desire for connection between Fakile and Pulang in Netflix's Blood and Water? Either way, this image highlights the longing that can exist within Black girlhood to find one's chosen kin, a term that is used to understand how familial bonds are formed outside of blood relationships, and also a concept that Black girlhood studies scholar like Corrine Field and Lakeisha Simmons discuss in their article, Black Girl and Kinship, where they explore why kinship bonds are developed and how they sustain Black girls in their girlhood. So the longing in this image, I think, is actually quite palpable, seeing that we learned that the girls never actually meet, at least not yet. Perhaps there's a part 2. So this scene that we have here is an imagined one, or even more specifically, it is a dream that the 2 girls are sharing. So in this scene, we have that Dinah writes, "In my heart, I'm sure there's another girl like me, across an ocean or sea, spending the night in an indigo dream of the 2 of us playing in the same sun, in the same sand, hand in hand, every morning at day clean." I want to quickly focus on this indigo dream. Indigo, a color that symbolizes devotion, justice, creativity, dignity, and wisdom. And it is also a color of integrity and intuition. And then, of course, this concept of dreaming, which in this image is portrayed as rest, deep sleep, imagination, safety, communication, and longing. And we see that each girl is fast asleep in her own bed, and then they dream of each other, and then will wake again at day clean with the same longing. So in Fields and Simmons' article, Black Girlhood and Kinship, they write, "We draw attention to how coming of age is a relational process, how girls seek both interdependence and independence in relations with others. Therefore, Indigo Dreaming is not just a story exploring the interconnectedness of the Black diaspora. It is also a story of how Black girls come of age. It is a story of how Black girls seek kinship in order to learn about others and also to learn about themselves." So what do other Black girls eat or drink are some of the questions that they're asking within this text. How do they do their hair? What stories have they heard from their grandmothers? What games do they play? And what music do they listen to? In asking these questions of each other, the girls of Indigo Dreaming are trying to solidify their kinship bond, one that will foster their interdependence and independence as they grow into Black women. So Black girlhood studies scholars like Joyce Ladner, Kira Gaunt, Ruth Nicole Brown, and many others have been trying to create spaces for Black girls to do exactly what Indigo Dreaming is doing, giving Black girls space to imagine, to dream, to learn, to be creative, and of course, to grow. And the story is also rooted in legacy. It not only is about how girls will learn about themselves from each other, but it's also, like my scholars and my colleagues were saying earlier, it's about them learning their history. And in this particular scene, that history is being passed down by their grandmothers. And again, we have a very staple image when it comes to African American culture, that Black girls are always in relationship with a strong maternal figure, which is a concept heavily dealt with in popular media and in scholarship. And of course, for those who are familiar with Insecure, we have Molly's relationship with her mother, Cece, as well as it's super embedded in scholarship when we have kind of maternal metaphors with Sadia Hartman in her text, Lose Your Mother. So Dinah Johnson acknowledges that this is a story of legacy and history, a theme that continues to dominate stories of Black girlhood. Black girls understand who they are when they know their history, and in addition, it is a story of kinship, imagination, and desire. And the last thing I want to think about is how Indigo Dreaming also acts as an archive, a written archive of Black girlhood in the 21st century. And so an archive of also what it means to be remembered about how to keep Black girls safe, how to give them spaces to dream, and how to give them spaces to imagine. And I will stop there. Thank you all for listening. So I know we have just a few minutes before we open it up for Q&A. So members in the audience, feel free to go ahead and put any kind of questions or comments, and we'll have that. But I just wanted to kind of acknowledge all of the insight that we just received, just basing it on this one book. Was there any other thoughts that you all wanted to reflect on, or as we continue to have this conversation before we open it up for Q&A? I don't know, Dinah, are you smiling? I can't tell if that means you want to say something first.
No, I'm just smiling because even though I am a scholar of children's literature, it's it's a whole different thing to hear someone else talk about your creative writing, right? So
Do you feel that, I mean, obviously we hadn't discussed what I was going to say prior, but do you feel that some of the things I captured were some things that you had already been thinking about, or is it just that I'm just layering on top of things that you automatically felt connected to?
when you're writing creatively, a lot of it is subconscious, right? So it went through all those iterations and went away from the story of the visit of President Momo and the delegation from Georgia and South Carolina, and just became, who are those people on the other side of the world? Yeah.
Thank you. I just am reading some of the comments. Thank you. It says, I appreciate how Dr. Daley situated Indigo Dreaming in children's literature and Black girlhood. You're totally welcome. Just some shout outs in the chat as well. Avery or Gloria, were there any other thoughts that you felt, oh, I really wanted to have the opportunity to say this?
One of the things that when I was reading the author's notes, and one of the things that came back to me was I live in California now, but my family is still in North Carolina, and we go back every Christmas to stay at the family home. And one of my aunts married a man from South Carolina. And every, I don't know if your family is like, they tell the same stories every year, but that's our story. And so we didn't know, I didn't know they would say his family is Geechee and they talk different than we do. So when I read Dinah Johnson's, the author, when I read your author's notes, it just flooded back my history and how you can take something like that and create a dynamic book like you've done that will engage students. It could be the start of a conversation to students or children about their family and, different aspects of the family life. So thank you for that.
Don't get slammed for, not being faithful to Gullah culture, right? Because I was inspired by it. The first version long ago was pretty faithful, but now it's just inspired by Gullah culture. So I hope I make that clear in the author's note.
So I was just going to say, as an educator in the visual fields, the visual arts, we use images and text juxtaposed and words juxtaposed to each other, oftentimes to highlight meanings, to change meanings of things. And I found that, after reading your book and just reading the book, being able to see that connection in terms of like young girls across the sea, across the ocean, who are separated by two different languages. And that was very powerful for me because I use words and images together. But the fact that they may be separated from two different languages, but have this ancestral connection. And that was very powerful for me. And as I said, it was a moving story because I have young daughters, and I'm sure that, I've seen many a times where my wife or myself have been braiding their hair and having them squirm in our laps. And so it was very apropos. So again, thank you for that.
As we know, getting your hair braided is a rite of passage. There are some questions and comments jumping in, so I'm just going to go ahead and move us to the Q&A time. So thank you all for engaging with us. So I have this first question that says, for Sitting Pretty, what was the decision process or ideas behind the photographs of the dolls as opposed to illustrations?
Okay, I think that they were inspired by my own doll collection. So I guess the editor didn't see a reason to have them illustrated instead of having children see actual dolls because they're works of art, right? Doll makers are artists. So I think it was important for the people who are reading the book to see those actual dolls.
Were any of your actual dolls photographed for the book?
Oh, they're all my dolls except for two of them. My editor is a doll collector too, Christy Italiano. So she wanted her dolls in the book, but I think she realized that she couldn't insert too many of them, but two of her dolls are in the book. But yeah, all of those are dolls from my collection.
Awesome. The next comment is from Dr. Pressman. It says, thank you for this fascinating juxtaposition of perspectives. I would like to ask Dinah Johnson to speak more about the water imagery in your book, perhaps thinking about the African mermaid poem that you presented, and what is the meaning of that?
There's no deep meaning, right? It's just that the sea is so important to the Gullah people, and it's what connects us across the Middle Passage. And Avery, what do you want to say about that? I mean, water is a great symbol, right?
Oh, definitely. Definitely the cleansing in so many ways, and not just the physical, but the spiritual as well. The fact that it is sustains life, right? And it is one of the, the life source of many places around the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And also, I think Black people have to reclaim water in a certain way. We've given it up, right? Like, Black people don't always swim, even when they're from the islands. Right. Or Black girls don't get in the water because they don't want their hair to turn back.
Back to the hair.
Right? I want our little girls to have mermaids also. Right?
Yeah. Yeah, you make such a great point. I didn't think about that concept of needing to reclaim our relationship to water. There's another great comment that says, I had the honor of reading one of the first drafts of Dinah's book. This is from Sandy Richardson, Indigo Dreaming. And as time has passed, it was a secret joy to watch my friend Dinah delve deeper and more intensely into the questions of relativity to others across the world, and to bring her self-discoveries to this completed work, which is one of my favorites of all of her works, also one of my favorites. Dinah, it is a work of art. Love you, Sandy.
Okay, so remember the name Sandy Richardson. She's a writer as well. So look for her books, okay? White Southern, with all their own insights and all that richness. Thank you, Sandy, for being here. And so look for Sandy Richardson's work.
Yeah, Sandy, please let us know in the Q&A. Put your information there so we can all really enjoy it. So another question is, how can I find inspiration to create visuals that are just as meaningful as my text? Avery, do you want to maybe take on, how do we make imagery just as I don't know, engaging as the text?
Yeah, well, I tell a lot of my students, it has to be an iterative process. So, we have intuition about how something should be, right? But we also need to test that out and use the intellectual component as well. And it's okay to have intuition about something, and it's okay to test it over again and again, and create iterative or iterations for your visuals, and then run it by people, and get lots of opinions and voices about it as well.
When you're thinking about design, is there like a design tip that always comes to mind, even when we're thinking about how we should be looking at picture books or how we should be looking at imagery in general? Is there something that always sticks out to you that people should consider?
Well, I mean, particularly when it comes to children's books, I mean, it really has to be, the narration has to be in line with the story, right? And it has to really speak to that. So I would just say, if it's good storytelling and the images are there and support that, and then it's going to be a good story.
Thank you. There is another question. It says, did you want to answer that?
Well, all I was thinking is that I'm guessing that everyone who's on this Zoom right now knows a lot about children's books, but maybe not. So in case you don't know, most often writers and illustrators do not work together. The editor purchases the story and then hires the illustrator to illustrate those words. So I just wanted to throw that out there. And then luckily it can all come together,
Hopefully, yes. Yeah. That is the hope, that they overlap nicely and that they're both telling the same story, even though they may be adding parts of the story through the illustrations that don't show up in the text, or the text has parts of an image that's not necessarily showing up in the illustrations. That is true. A lot of people are confused or baffled by the fact that authors and illustrators aren't in conversation during a production of a book. There's lots. I've had this conversation with Matt De La Pena as well, and he has some great thoughts about that too. So in this next question, it says, in Black Magic, the little girl rides to Molly in her dream on a sort of shadow figure. How can this be interpreted?
We have to ask the illustrator, Greg Christie, about that, right? Lashon, you want to help me out with this?
I mean,
Yeah, so for
it's
those who don't
interpretation.
know, what?
Since it's about interpretation, do you have an interpretation of that shadow figure?
I guess it's the African spirit, the spirit of the diaspora.
The ancestors. It's the ancestors.
Exactly.
Yeah, I'm not sure. So we don't have any more questions in the chat, but are there any kind of final thoughts? Actually, there is one. Sorry, thank you, Sandy. It says, for Gloria Rhodes, this is Sandy again. I had the distinct privilege of being the assistant of the director of the SC Center for Oral Narration for 25 years, or some 25 years ago. And I just want to voice how very important that work proved to be in terms of writing my own stories. So thank you for your work to continue to preserve the stories of our lives, which help us to better understand our present and definitely can lead us to a better future.
Thank you. I
And
appreciate
Gloria,
that.
I want to add to that, Gloria. You know, these stories are so important because there was such a long period, as I'm sure you know, because of your connection to the Gullah Geechee community, when people were ashamed of being Geechee. I mean, that was a bad word. Geechee was a bad word, right? So it's so important that we tell these stories and get the stories told in new, insightful ways so that people start understanding the importance. So that's why that interchange between President Momo and the Gullah people was so important, because they reconnected and these people could see, yes, we have a history, you know, because so many of the textbooks in this country still say, oh, Black people were brought, Africans were brought here and lost all their culture, lost everything. And some people still believe that. So it's so important that, you know, there are two films about the Gullah Geechee, the connection between the people in the United States and Sierra Leone. Family Across the Sea is the first one, and I'm blanking on the name of the second one. But
and I know there was a documentary on 60 Minutes last year that was about they did interviews, and it's one of those cultural dynamics that now it's the stigma of it is gone, and they're really proud to be in South Carolina, in that area, and it showcased all the cultural and historical aspects of it, and the art, and just to create everything. And so it was really rich, and I can't remember the name, and I'm sorry, as a librarian I should know that, but I'll do better.
I actually have a question about that, Gloria, because as someone who also teaches about African-American folklore, right? There once was a time when being able to tell the story was the most important thing, but now we are a literate-based community, so having picture books or having books available and being able to read is now much more kind of culturally valuable. Now, as someone who's like thinking about the importance of oral history in a time where being literate has this cultural value, do you feel that there's tension or pull towards removing ourselves completely from an oral history in order to value literacy? Or do you still feel that there's like space to have that oral history and have it be present in the community?
I think there is totally, I from the people that I contacted, once their names came to me, they were just delighted to have an opportunity to tell their story, to share what they have been through, and so others can listen to it and read, and the transcripts and everything. So I think it's definitely something that is being observed, something that it's seen as an enhancement to the learning environment. So yeah, I don't think it's
storytelling is still very, very big in South Carolina, actually.
Yeah.
Some of the most revered members of our community are oral storytellers.
Right.
It's true, but is that is it a dying talent? Is the next generation well prepared to tell these next set of stories without having the picture book available to them?
Good question.
I already know my answer, but while you're thinking about it, we do have some more questions in the chat. Someone acknowledged, were you all thinking of Daughters of the Dust? Was that the other film that you were
No,
thinking? Okay.
not me. I can't
Okay.
remember.
But if you have not seen Daughters of the Dust, you must see it. And
true.
you should also, Avery, I'm sure you've read the book about the making of Daughters of the Dust.
Mhm.
It is so fascinating.
Sean, to answer, to go back to that, where they're, those stories they're being told in other spaces as well, right? And so we even think of the music space, right? Those stories are continuing to be told without the backdrop of the images that are involved. So that's just another area that we're seeing younger people, youth carrying it out through music.
And also spoken word.
Spoken word,
is yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's really powerful.
Yep.
It's true. I agree. It's just once things start touching like capitalism, then I'm like, are we like, how is that happening? But another question for a different webinar. This next question is, Dinah, you always seem to include some sort of reflection on Africa in your works. Can you talk about your connection to Africa, or if anyone else has any connections to Africa, if you want to go ahead and discuss that in our last few minutes together?
Well, Avery, I really wish I had included at least one Adinkra symbol in the book, because I love the Adinkra symbols. I mean, they're really, really important.
Yeah.
So I wish I had done that. Yeah. I've just always it's been important. The most important trip of my life was my first trip to West Africa. And like I said, I'm from a military family, so I've lived in Germany. I lived in Iran in the days of the Shah. That was fascinating. But my first trip to Africa was the most important trip ever. I mean, people said, "Welcome home, sister." They said those words. I mean, there are other people who don't care, right? I mean, they were more interested in talking to the white people in my group or whatever, but I did hear those words, "Welcome home, sister." So that's, what more can I say about that?
Avery, did you also have something that you wanted to say?
Well, I mean, yeah, and I'll hear those words in about 9 days, "Welcome home, brother," when I'll actually be in Ghana on the 17th. So it'll be my first trip, but Africa has always played, and that the diaspora has always played a part in my own personal life, as well as my professional life and research. In what I do, it's always to reach back, to learn from, again, the words of the Sankofa, and to help the community, to help the communities, right, that we all come from. But yeah, it's definitely played a central part in my work as well.
And also, when I visit schools and talk about the connection of African Americans to Africa, some little third grader always says, "I ain't no African," so I'm trying to work against that.
Yes.
Because that kind of thinking is still very much out there. People don't understand the term African American. Why would we say that? Where does that come from?
Right.
Any final thoughts on that, Gloria? As a librarian?
It's just one of those, it's a topic that you constantly learn the more you research. And Avery, I'm going to talk to you. We are establishing a Black Studies collection, and we're using some of the symbols. And I'm not sure if we're using them the right way. So I want to kind of get your feedback on some of the things. And thank you. I'm glad this has been just really wonderful.
Well, we are just 30 seconds to ending, so I just want to thank all of my panelists. Thank you, Dinah, for blessing us with Indigo Dreaming. Thank you all in the chats for asking really great questions, and all of you who attended. And to Danny, my wonderful, wonderful fellow.
Yes.
I can't do very much without nowadays. So just thank you all again for having such a wonderful conversation today. I hope that we get to do it again soon.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you so
everybody.
much, everyone.
Thank you.
Take care.